If you're a British national who moved to Portugal before Brexit, there's a good chance that someone has told you something completely wrong about permanent residency status. Maybe it was in a Facebook group, or maybe it was a well meaning friend, but either way, the misinformation around the withdrawal agreement is all over the place. In this video, I'm breaking down 7 myths that I keep hearing again and again from pre-Brexit Brits in Portugal. And stay till the end, because myth number 7 is the one that's stopping people from applying when they're already eligible and costing them a year or more that they really don't need to waste. Now, the first myth is that you need A2 Portuguese for permanent residency as a pre-Brexit Brit. So people think that you can't get this unless you pass an A2 Portuguese exam, and that is usually the case. But if you're a pre-Brexit British national who's covered by the withdrawal agreement, then A2 Portuguese is only needed for citizenship, not permanent residency. These are two completely different things. And this myth spreads because people just mix up and mash together the citizenship rules with the residency rules. They see someone talking about A2 requirements and assume it applies to everything. If your goal right now is permanent residency after 5 years, and if you were here before Brexit, this is critical, you should be focusing on proving your qualifying residency period and meeting the withdrawal agreement conditions. The only time you need A2 language ability is if you decide to go for citizenship. So if you're still working towards A2 Portuguese, you don't need to let that stop you from pursuing your permanent residency rights under the withdrawal agreement. Myth number 2 is that the permanent residency card is only valid for 5 years. Now, a lot of people believe that when you get this card, it's only valid for 5 years and then you have to start over. Well, as a pre-Brexit Brit in Portugal, the permanent residency card is typically valid for 10 years. And this is really important because if you think that it is going to expire in 5 years, then you might assume that you constantly need to reprove everything or that your status is less secure than it actually is. But in fact, this 10-year validity gives you much more breathing room. And when it comes to renewal at the 10-year mark, this is mostly administrative. Things like updating your photo, confirming your address, not reproving your entire qualifying period, which makes a big difference. So myth number 3 is that you can only leave Portugal for 24 months every 3 years. People think that once you have permanent residency, you're still stuck in Portugal. If you leave for too long, you lose everything. But under the withdrawal agreement, your permanent residency rights are a lot more robust than people think. In fact, under this agreement, the legal rule allows you to be absent for up to 5 consecutive years without losing your permanent residency status. That's a whole 5 years, not 2 years in 3. But here's the really important part. That's the legal threshold, yes. But I probably wouldn't recommend taking such long absences without having your permanent residency card in hand to prove your status. And at the moment, that is one of the biggest problems facing pre-Brexit Brits in Portugal. IMA has a really big backlog, and many people, myself included, who qualify for permanent residency are still waiting for getting an appointment with IMA in the first place and having their cards issued. So yes, the withdrawal agreement does say 5-year absences are okay. But practically speaking, if you're planning to be away for that long and you don't have your physical card yet, I probably wouldn't take the risk because you might run into complications at borders or when re-entering Portugal. Yes, you're protected by the law, but you really do need the card to prove it. Myth number 4 is that any long trip resets your 5-year clock. So people think that if you leave Portugal for a few months while building up your 5 years towards permanent residency, your count starts again from 0. But the rule isn't never leave Portugal. There are permitted absences while you're building continuous residence, but they just need to fit within specific limits. So people get confused because the calculation is not always intuitive. It's not just don't leave for more than X days per year, but the withdrawal agreement guidance lays out what breaks continuity and what doesn't, and it's a bit more nuanced than just a simple countdown. In practical terms, short trips like holidays, family visits, and work travel are generally fine as long as they're not so extended that they suggest you're not actually resident in Portugal. But if you're taking multi-month absences regularly, then that's when you need to be a bit more careful and make sure that you track everything. If you're coming up to your 5-year point of temporary residency, as many of us are who came here just after Brexit, beginning of the pandemic, you should sit down now and make a simple timeline of your travel. Don't do it later when you're stressed out and trying to reconstruct it from old boarding passes before your IMA appointment. I recommend doing it now. Track it clearly so when it's time to apply, you're not scrambling to gather all these different bits and pieces of documents. So myth number 5 is this assumption that self-sufficient people can't get permanent residency. So there's this assumption that the withdrawal agreement protections are really only for people who are actually working in Portugal. And if you're self-sufficient or retired, then you're in a grey zone. But no matter what your source of income, if you were lawfully resident in Portugal under the EU freedom of movement rights before the end of the transition period at the end of 2020, then the withdrawal agreement can absolutely cover you. But the category you fall into matters. If you're a worker or self employed, proving your lawful residence is often more straightforward because you have an employment paper trail, like your contract, for example. But if you're economically non active, like self sufficient, retired, or financially dependent on a spouse, then the authorities may ask you for more evidence. This isn't because you don't have rights, but it's just because they want to verify that you actually did meet the conditions of lawful residence during the period that you're counting. So, what exactly does that mean for you? Well, if you're self sufficient, you should expect to show a cleaner paper trail, which could mean proof of resources, proof of continuous residence, comprehensive health insurance, if it was required at the time, and whatever else the authority asks for to confirm that you were lawfully here. So covered doesn't mean effortless. It just means that your rights are protected, but you still need to prove that you qualify. Myth number 6 is that permanent residency is granted at Portugal's discretion. This is an important one. People think that at the 5-year mark, you apply and Portugal decides whether to grant you permanent residency based on how they feel about your case. But in fact, under the withdrawal agreement framework, permanent residence after 5 years is declaratory. And that means that once you meet the conditions, you acquire that right by law automatically. It's not supposed to be a discretionary, we'll think about it and let you know kind of situation. And this is the part people miss. Even if the right is automatic in law, you do still need to apply for the document as proof, and you will have to submit evidence to show that you qualify. So the cleaner way to think about it is you have the rights first, but the paperwork comes second. So you're not asking for permission, but you are demonstrating that you already have the right to permanent residency. And that does require documentation, which is where people do get tripped up. You might walk into an appointment thinking it's okay because it's automatic, and then you feel blindsided when the IMA officer asks you for stuff like proof of residence continuity, proof of resources, and so on. So when you prepare your application, approach it like you're building a case file. You're not hoping that IMA are going to be nice, but you're showing them the law, which already gives you the status, and giving them a packet of evidence that confirms it. This is the best way to handle it and ensure that you're successful. Now, myth number 7 is a really important one, and it's the myth that the 5 years of temporary residency starts from the date on your plastic card. Now, many pre-Brexit Brits assume that their 5-year temporary residency qualifying period starts from whatever date is printed on their current plastic residency card. But in fact, you were probably here before that, because during COVID, there was a long delay where CEF, as it was at the time, got tied up with complications in issuing these cards. So in fact, your 5 years is tied to the date when you became lawfully resident in Portugal. And for many of us under the withdrawal agreement, that can be 1 or 2 years earlier than the date on the plastic card. This myth is costing people time they do not need to lose. They look at their plastic card, they see that it says 2021 or 2022, and they think, right, I'm not eligible until 26 or 27. But your lawful residency might have started in 2019 or 2020, depending on your registration, your crew, or your original documentation. The plastic card is evidence of your status, but it's not necessarily the start date of your lawful residence period. So what you need to do right now is go back and look at your original start point. Do you have the A4 EU certificate with the EU stars printed on it? This is the residency permit that you were given when you came here as an EU citizen before Brexit. And the date on this is the starting point. And 5 years from that date is when you can apply and be eligible for permanent residency. This myth stops many pre-Brexit Brits from applying and getting permanent residency when they're already qualified. And that's a year you can't get back. My EU certificate starts in January 2020, which means that January this year, I was already eligible for my 5 years. So my advice is ignore the plastic card. Law does not cover this, and look for that original A4 piece of paper with the EU stars on that you got from Portugal when you first moved here before Brexit. So if you're approaching 5 years of residency in Portugal and you're a pre-Brexit British citizen here under the withdrawal agreement, the best thing I can recommend next is to confirm your real start date of lawful residence, check your absence timeline, and put together a proper evidence file. Myths like these spread because the withdrawal agreement is complicated. People in Facebook groups love to share stuff they've heard without checking if it's actually true. But you don't have to operate on misinformation. The framework is there, your rights are there, and now you know what to look for. If you're dealing with this process right now, I want to point you to a couple of useful resources. First off, several people I know have set up a dedicated Facebook group specifically to help Brits in Portugal seek permanent residency. And there's a community there actively sharing their real experiences and keeping track of what's actually working with IMA right now, because people are having difficulty in getting appointments to get that permanent residency card. There's also an application tracker at the website wabcportugal.com. Both these links are in the description. And on the website, people are logging their timelines and the responses they receive from IMA, and if anyone has actually received their cards. There's a lot of difficulty around this at the moment, so this is important to see what's happening on the ground, not just what the law says should happen. So if this video cleared up some of the noise for you, please hit that like button and subscribe. There's plenty more misinformation where this came from, and I'm going to keep breaking it down in plain English. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.